I'm going to talk about Dutch type, or type in what Fournier in the 18th century called the Dutch taste, because many of the people I'll talk about are not Dutch in any real sense. So is there a Dutch taste? First of all, Dutch. The Netherlands is the modern word for a part of Europe that has two countries in it today. To the south is modern Belgium. In the north are the Netherlands, or Low Countries. There was a split between the two parts of this area in the 16th century. Much of modern Belgium was broken up into different areas governed by local aristocracy, but by and large it was in the Catholic part of Europe, as indeed was much of France. In the north were people who had adopted the new form of religion promoted by people like Martin Luther, the Protestant religion. And the tensions between the two parts finally broke up the area into a northern and a southern part. They've been joined up from time to time since, but for the last 200 years they've been two separate European countries. So who am I talking about? I said they weren't all Dutch people. Robert Grandjean is certainly very much a Frenchman. Hendrik van den Keer, who's been mentioned already in this course, he called himself Henri Dutour when he was speaking French, particularly to someone like Plantin. But Van den Keer is Flemish or Dutch, and that's the name he used himself. Nicolas Briot is certainly a French name, but he worked in the Netherlands, the modern Netherlands. Christoffel van Dyck, very much a Dutchman. Miklos Kish, he's from Hungary. Peter de Walpergen didn't go to the Netherlands so long as we know. He originated in Germany, and finally the Englishman William Caslon. So it's quite a variety of different people. This is an image that I've put in here to say that the Netherlands had various areas of interest. And I'll try and explain them. Clearly, the first four words are maritime, yacht, schooner, skipper, and boom. Well, they're all Dutch, and indeed they look rather Dutch as names. So the great maritime empire of the Netherlands created a lot of its riches. So here we have shipping. What about landscape and easel? Well, they belong to pictures, don't they? A landscape is a painting. An easel is a thing that the artist puts his canvas on. The Dutch, or Germanic, let's say, an easel is the word that means a donkey to carry things. Lastly, gas. Where does that word come from? Well, it doesn't. It's made up. It was. This is to show the interest in the Netherlands in the natural sciences, which is a very prominent part of the activity there. Just a few more Dutch names. Huygens, Leuwenhoek, Scientists, so here's the natural sciences. Vermaelen. He's an engineer that ought to be better known in England, because if Norfolk and Suffolk are agricultural regions, it's because Vermaelen drained the water from them. He was a hydraulic engineer, building windmills and so on, and pumps. De Ruyter. Well, he made himself known in England by destroying what was of the English fleet, sailing up the Thames and doing it. Rather more peaceably, Anthony van Dyck was a court painter in England. And lastly, William III, King of England. He was Dutch, came from the Netherlands, and he ruled jointly with Queen Mary, who was the daughter of the previous English king, who had been persuaded to go away. A lot of money around. One of the classic examples is the speculation in exotic tulips, which, if you look at history of economics, was famous as the example of a great boom and bust. Crazy prices being paid for these extraordinary flowers, and speculations that did indeed bust. But there you are. The Embarrassment of Riches is the name of a book by Simon Sharma on this extraordinary opulence that produced the paintings. But it also promoted a kind of liberal attitude to what you could do as long as you're making money. Religion, whichever one you want. Printing, what can you print? Anything pretty well. And so type became a major industry, making it and selling it. There is a book which I do recommend. It may not be easy to find because it keeps going out of print, but there you are. It's one book well worth looking for and finding. So what were Dutch books like? We can't really avoid mentioning the family of the Elseviers, who were certainly Dutch printers in Leiden. They had a speciality, which were tiny books. This one, not much more than 120 millimeters in height, is tiny. And there became a kind of craze for collecting these tiny books, which are very pretty, beautifully printed, lovely type. So who made the type? In France, everyone knew. Of course, it was good French type. On the left, you've got a little type specimen of the 18th century. It's a petit texte, that's a size of type, about an 8-point, which was used by Elsevier, but it's by Garamond. This is a member of the Fournet family saying so in the 18th century. And on the right, Pierre Didot, member of the great printing family of the Didots, said, "Oh yes, Garamond, his types are a bit old-fashioned now." But he established and maintained the glory of the Elsevier family. It's all French type. Was it? Well, here you're seeing that tiny little book blown up a little bit bigger. Oh yes, that's French type. Tiny type, an 8-point type, beautifully printed. So, whether the Dutch made it or not, they certainly could print it, which very few printers could have done as beautifully and neatly as this. And we've got confirmation because the mattresses for that type the petit texte, or 8-point, are in fact, one set of them is in the Plantin collection in Antwerp. And while we're looking at that, it's worth noting that the italic that goes with it is one by another French punch cutter, Robert Grandjean, which rather confirms the French origin of the early Elsevier types. This didn't suit some Dutch scholars. Willems, I call him Dutch, but in fact he was Belgian in origin, though it's pretty clear that his name is essentially Flemish or Dutch. But he said, no, the maker of these types wasn't Garamond or any foreigner. He was a Dutch punch cutter called Christoffel van Dyck. Well, he'd found this specimen in the Plantin collection, which says specimens of type cut by the late Christoffel van Dyck. This is fairly late, it's 1681. Are they all cut by Christoffel van Dyck? Well, some are, some aren't. There's quite a lot of French stuff here, including, by the way, if you look at the left-hand column, the third type down is by Robert Grandjean, and so on. But here is the Dutch style, if you like, by a Fleming, let's call him, in what is modern Belgium, working for Plantin and also in business by himself, making a type that is much bolder, blacker than anything that was done by French punch cutters. Maybe there's an echo here of black letter, and there's a certain compression too. It's a big type, 40-point, but beautifully cut. And if you're used to reading your Bible in a textura Gothic, as many people were in that Protestant part of the world, you might find a type like this comforting with its dark colour and compression. Well, there are other types of this style. This isn't quite as black and quite as compressed, but even so, this is the work of this Frenchman, Briot, about an 18-point, used in England as this particular example. Rather worn-out type, but very beautifully cut. Alas, the original materials haven't survived, but notice, for example, in some of the lower lines, that R with the rather small bowl. And you can see Briot's work in this big set of capital letters, which does survive in the Netherlands with the Enschede collection. Very beautifully cut indeed, very slightly condensed. The C and the G are not exactly circular. Well, there's a slight sort of compression there. And there is that G. But the quality of cutting is quite amazing. Look at the serif in the top of the G, a kind of almost a fishhook. That's a Dutch feature which you don't get in French work, and we'll see another example of it in a moment. And there is that R with the small bowl. Very a characteristic letter in that font. Beautifully handled. What you're looking at here, you won't find, I think, anywhere else for the moment. This is Christoffel van Dyck's own specimen. Specimens of all the types cut by Christoffel van Dyck. Well, again, it's not entirely true. At the top of that left-hand column is the type by Grandjean that I've mentioned, but most of it is. And it's in England. It was discovered, I think it's fair to say, by an English scholar, Justin Howes, who simply looked through a new index to the UK's National Archives and found it. And so here is a Dutch specimen circulating among Englishmen who clearly had it in mind to buy some. It's a very fine specimen, and so I'm going to show you work which is undoubtedly that of Christoffel van Dyck. Here's about a 14-point Roman, very beautifully cut. It's not French, but it's certainly the equal of some of the great French punch cutters of the century before. And here's his italic, beautifully done. And in this case, one's glad to know that the original matrices do survive. And there is, in fact, a hot metal monotype version of this type called Van Dyck. One other type of Van Dyck I ought to mention, because it was hugely used in England. This is, in fact, an 18th century type specimen, but the Enschede firm who had the matrices put the names of the sizes in French, English and German, hoping to sell them there. And this one, this 22-point roughly, is a type which was very, very greatly used in England. Not as elegant as the 14-point I've shown you, rather rugged in fact, and with that spiky serif. There it is. But it may be rugged, but it's nicely done and will stand up even to the low quality of English printing at the time that it was made. Another name in the list I gave you, Kish. I said he was Hungarian. It's debatable. His language was the Hungarian language, or Magyar, and he was born in the part of Europe that now is part of Romania by a kind of adjustment that was made after the First World War. It was called Transylvania, and they were Protestant. And being Protestant, they wanted the Bible in their own language. So they sent a young man, young Miklos or Nicholas Kish, to the place to learn printing in Amsterdam. So he went there, and while he was there, he actually learned how to make type as well as print it. And there's his specimen. It's one of these extraordinary survivals of a very fragile sheet of paper, of which just one copy survives in the National Library in Hungary. But it was printed in Amsterdam, and at the bottom it says, in Dutch, if you want more type, come to Nicholas Kish. And people did. When he was on his way home, he must have perhaps unloaded some of his materials. Here's a German type specimen of about 1720, showing type that are Holländische. These Dutch types and others can be bought in the Erhard Type Foundry, and that was in Leipzig. So this is the Dutch style in Germany, slightly compressed. Again, if we look at detail, look at that, particularly the A here, which is much narrower than anything that a French punch cut would have made of it, but very beautifully handled. And his italic is something quite new, much more even than the italics that were made, for example, by the French punch cutters. That G in particular is very characteristic. So here is a whole new style coming into use in European printing houses. He even sold some punches in Italy. And here you have an example of a book printed in, again, these slightly compressed letters. Look at the lowercase g, for example. Not over compressed, but it certainly isn't as wide as earlier types had been. And it's one that was picked out by the printing historian Updike, who had the wit to realize this was something quite special among types in use at the time. It does survive. I mean, the original, a set of old matrices survived in Germany, the ones we've seen in Leipzig. And here is the type, which was rather unjustly renamed Jansson by the German type founders, who was indeed a printer and type founder, but he wasn't the one who made these types. This is the work of Gish. Coming to England, John Fell, Bishop of Oxford, had an ambition to create a kind of what became the University Press at Oxford. And he started collecting matrices from which new types could be cast. He couldn't find original types, original punches in the Low Countries. They weren't willing to sell the punches. So he hired Peter de Walpergen to come to Oxford. Now, Walpergen was, as I said, German in origin, so he'd lived in the Low Countries, but he came and he actually worked in Oxford, cutting type. Is it good type? Well, it's not elegant type, but there it is. It's the so-called Fell type that is still occasionally used in Oxford. Similarly, another person making type, this time in London, but he had an eye on Oxford. He would have worked for Fell. This is a man called Joseph Moxon. He'd lived in the Low Countries. His father had to leave England for reasons we're not quite sure of, maybe religious ones. But here's his handbook of printing, teaching English or London printers how to print, which they certainly needed to learn. And he could make type too. If he made that black letter, he needed quite a lot of lessons himself. And he says, if you want to make good type, the best model is the work of Christoffel van Dyck. And here's his own version of it, in works that he published. Not elegant, maybe, but this isn't very far from the work we've seen of Van Dyck. And in fact, Moxon made his own type. And this is certainly one of the best of them, this rather large, great canon, about a 48 point, which in fact lasted not only through his lifetime, but was used in the 18th century. It's rather rugged stuff, not unlike that of Christoffel van Dyck, but there it is. Lastly, an Englishman making type. There had been others earlier on, but William Caslon made his name as a type founder in London. And here is his portrait holding his specimen of type. He came from the Midlands, not far from Birmingham, where one of the great specialities was metalwork and small arms, muskets, rifles, were one of the great special products of that part of the world. Here is a musket which is made up of various bits. You've got the stock to put into your shoulder against the recoil of the musket, the barrel down which the bullet goes, and the lock. So what was the lock? Well, it was kind of complicated. By pulling the trigger, you made this part swing, and it carries a flint. You've got a little pan of gunpowder, which is connected by a hole to the main charge that will detonate the musket and send the bullet. So when that flint produces a spark, it will either ignite the gunpowder, or it may be just a flash in the pan, as they called it. So a rather less than completely reliable thing, but that was the musket with which wars were fought and won. It was said that Caslon, with his gunmaker to whom he was apprenticed, did some rather fine lettering on the lock, on this part of the musket, and became so good at doing the lettering that someone thought maybe he could make type too. Well, here is the lock of a musket, or a musketoon, a rather large musket, supplied to the English monarchy, the army. You see the symbol of George I, G.R., beautifully engraved, and the lettering of the gun maker, Waldridge, is pretty well engraved too. Could this be the work of young Caslon? Well, they took the lock off to clean it up, and that's what they found at the back of the lock. So here's a genuine example of Caslon before he got into type founding. But of course, he became, at some date before about 1720, a type maker, punch cutter, type founder, and came to dominate the market in England. Here's his first specimen in just off Old Street in London, in the city. And as you see, he made not only Roman type, but in that right-hand column, he got into a number of other kinds of non-Latin type too. Gothic, which in this case is a rather special language, but at the bottom right-hand corner is maybe the very first type he ever made. He got a commission to do an Arabic type for one of the missionary societies, and that may have got him going. We've got documents for that. If you want to pay homage to the Caslon family, because he started a dynasty of Caslons making type, here in Old Street, where he began his trade, is the tomb of the Caslon family, put there by one of the later members of it. So here we are. Pica, that is 12 point, made by William Caslon. Is it Dutch? Well, that's a Dutch type. And it's Dutch type used by a certain William Bowyer, who is said to have been one of the people who said to Caslon, "We could set you up in business and finance a type foundry." There are the two together. That's certainly a Dutch type below. And there's William Caslon's pica Roman of the same size. Well, they're not all identical. Those figures, the 15 here for the century, that's a very French style of letter. And there are other differences. The capital C of Coloneus below and Caslon's are just a little bit different. Caslon's has no bottom serif, but the rest of them are a pretty close match. Here's an English founder making Dutch type. Is it elegant? Well, not nearly as elegant as Christoffel van Dyck in the example of his type that I showed you. But it is pretty well managed, well spaced, well aligned. It makes a good page. Comfortable is what someone called it. And, of course, it was pretty widespread. In North America, people had to buy British, whether it was tea or type. And so when it came to making a Declaration of Independence, that's nearly all Caslon type. Certainly the text is Caslon's. The fourth line down is a kind of imitation of Caslon, but there's no doubt all the rest is good English type. To wind up these remarks on this Englishman making Dutch type, this is a curiosity. I've shown you the pica, but this is a big type. This is about a 60 point. And it's always struck me this is very much more the rugged size of kind of Dutch type making that's being followed here. And is it even by Caslon? We don't know. But it's the model for a very fine example of how you can adapt a rather crude book of type making to a digital model, as Matthew Carter did. Coming back to Caslon's own work, undoubtedly, 2 lines great primer, well, that's about 36 point. There's no Dutch model for this that I can spot, and something, we're in the 1730s now, something is changing. The shapes are no longer quite as rugged or angular. The lowercase a, particularly here, has a kind of roundness. Type with a new shape, perhaps? Well, we'll have to move on and see where that roundness might have come from.